Mm-hmm.
まったく。
Uh-huh.
みんないつも通りで安心したよ。バルト、作戦を伝えてくれ。
あ、わかった。まず教会への侵入。
Okay.
信託広場に面している正面は、そして裏口だ。
Yeah.
どちらから入るにしても厳しそうね。
Man. Soul Trigger is a really good game. A really good game that was only played by a handful of people, as it wouldn't just remain locked behind Japanese borders, but was also glanced over by the Japanese audience. This because it was made by a moderately small game developer infamously known for its mediocrity in Image Epoch, resulting in more than just low sales. Truly a modern day tragedy. However, just like with many of these Japanese exclusive games, its soul would live on many years down the line. Why did I write this? And thus, some incredible people that feel the same way about this game as I do decided to give Soul Trigger the localization it deserved. This way, illiterates like me would have another JRPG to enjoy. Granted, the localization unfortunately isn't fully completed. I've had this game on my radar ever since I played the fan translation of the Japanese WiiWare Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games about 1.5 years ago. However, I decided to postpone my playthrough after the translators posted their first update in 4 years on their official website, stating the translation was nearing completion. However, although I'm not 100% on this, the project seems to have gone cold, and I just booted up the incomplete game anyway, knowing full well I'd likely miss some context throughout the game's story. The thing is playable. More than playable, in fact. Though the wonky translation thingy takes its sweet time to load in words and occasionally even makes a typo, everything in-game is fully translated, aside from most of these word entries that describe what said word means. From the menus to the items to the moves and their effects, everything is in full and correct Inglando. And the same goes for the cutscenes as well. Even with a handful of more or less important cutscenes being untranslated in the first half and a sizable amount of cutscenes remaining untranslated in the second, all that remains unclear is context to the bigger picture. Hence why I made a second save file around the start of the second half to scoop up what I missed out on once the translation is complete. Whenever that is. Because context does in fact matter. Just ask fucking Twitter. Oh. Soul Trigger takes place in the dystopian city of Kaiserhald that's being ruled over by a group that calls themselves the Machine Church. In order to elevate Kaiserhald to new heights, however, the Machine Church is involved in some unethical funny business. You see, the city, and the world for that matter, isn't just inhabited by regular humans, but also by these beings called Children of Light. They possess and live off a special type of energy source called soul, which they can use as a power source for numerous things like machines and locked doors. However, if you got something that others do not, you're bound to be at risk of said others trying to exploit you. And that is what this game's story really is. The Children of Light have been captured by the Church and used for their soul for years upon years, killing them in the process once their soul is depleted. The Church has even developed a technology used to create these so-called innocents. These innocents have no will of their own and give up their soul as a power source as a substitute for when the real Children of Light have almost all been slaughtered. It's essentially a story about one group being enslaved to elevate the lives of the other. And thus, a group of elite warriors established Soul Trigger in order to free the Children of Light from oppression and explosively overthrow the evil Machine Church. The game starts you off in the middle of phase 1 of the Overthrowing Master Plan, where Soul Trigger is taking down the Church's battleship, aka one of their most important bases of operations. Things aren't going according to plan, however, and the group is at risk of being eliminated. And thus the heroic leader of the bunch, Wily, sacrifices himself so the rest of the group can escape and continue the all-important mission, going down with the wrecked battleship. You then get to play as Feral, the new leader of Soul Trigger after Wily's tragic death. Wily specifically appointed him as the new leader of the group if anything were to happen to him, because Feral's soul is different from the others. Feral possesses a special kind of soul called the Golden Soul, which is the only way to beat the Church's head of operations, aka God himself. Now it's Feral's task to free the Children of Light, somehow unlock the true power of the Golden Soul, and defeat actual God. Seems like an easy task to me. So you pull through with the aforementioned Overthrowing Master Plan while hordes of Machine Church puppets throw themselves at you in some good old turn-based battles. On the way you'll encounter lots of cool ass characters like this lady that forgot to put on pants, or this badass antagonist type guy with an enormous sword to compensate for something small. And sit through lots of well written, cool ass cutscenes that serve as a means for character and or plot development. The game handles the most JRPG of JRPG formulas, and that's perfectly fine with me. I'm growing so fucking tired of the boring ass narrative that every game needs to be inventive in order to not be called a watered down clone of game A, B and C. If a game executes an existing formula well without bringing anything groundbreaking to the table, said game can just be as enjoyable as any other game. And Soul Trigger's experience is proof of just that. This is Lars. Lars is not Feral. Soul Trigger is essentially a double-disc adventure consisting of Feral's arc and Lars's arc, which is pretty fucking cool. Both arcs are connected and disconnected at the same time, which makes for a really cool dynamic between the two. The end of Farrell's arc doesn't feel conclusive in the slightest, and you're just left with tons of questions, which are all slowly but steadily answered by simply playing and advancing through Lars' story. Having all of these questions about the previous arc that I wanted answers to was already more than enough to keep the game interesting. But from a gameplay perspective, this idea of two separate adventures is something I'm a big fan of. The second arc takes place in the same world, the same city, hell, even the same areas. But everything just feels new and refreshing after playing through Farrell's story for about 13 hours. There's a whole new story that's essentially a continuation of the previous arc, a whole new set of characters to get to know, new moves to use in combat, and even the returning areas and characters have a whole new dynamic to them. Even though I don't really want to spoil who makes a return and who doesn't, which is why I'll blur most of the characters in the second arc's battles, the returning characters will have different weapons and different movesets, or will simply be characters you've only ever fought against, rather than with. A little post-edit. I actually came up with a solution for the second arc character spoilers around the time I was finishing up this edit. Rather than this absolute abomination, I took a random frame from the start of the second arc, after which I cut out the turn graphic, the individual characters, and added myself as an additional character to fill up the fourth slot. Since every other second arc character, other than these three, is a major plot spoiler, turning this into this. I had to enlarge the characters a tad bit and the turn graphic isn't moving, but this way I can show more of the game. The vast majority of the gameplay shown will still be from the first arc, however. I figured I'd have no use for footage that spoiled the entire plot, so I recorded significantly less of it than of the first arc. But I got a few gigs of footage recorded nevertheless. So if you see my 4-year-old's first drawing type character on your screen, you now know why that came to be. Either way, having a whole new team to train rather than the same old for 13 hours is just something I ended up enjoying a whole lot. You then end up going through the same areas as the Farrell arc for different reasons, but the layouts are changed, and you also end up accessing additional areas Farrell's arc didn't give you access to. And then they even went the full extra mile by completely switching up the enemies you'll encounter in these same areas, with the game providing a full-fledged backstory on why these changes came to happen in the first place. Shit's just hella neat. It's a masterclass of recycling what was already presented to the player in earlier stages of the game. Different layouts, different enemies, and a whole new set of characters to plow through them makes these areas feel just as fresh and new as the first playthrough, while you're actually making your way through them for a second time. You spend most of the game's time wandering through these basic ass bitch hallways that feel like changing wallpapers, scavenging items, and fighting hordes of enemies along the way. It's a classic JRPG that doesn't beat around the bush. Walk, fight, walk, watch cutscene, fight, find item, fight. It's the most literal turn-based JRPG of turn-based JRPGs. And I just love every single portion of it. You fight the Machine Church's puppets with a team of 4 out of 6 members of Soul Trigger, whooping their ass with either the basic attack or the soul-consuming skill moves. On the surface level, that's all there really is to it. Pretty simple. You then scavenge materials to unlock new equipment in the base's shop, or simply unlock it by advancing the plot in Lars's arc and find or purchase some health or soul restoring items. And with that knowledge, you're pretty much filled in on what this game really is about. The concept of the combat is simple enough to be understood by a 12-year-old. But hot damn, does it stay enjoyable for the entire 27 hours you spend on this game. Though the combat is as simple as using a soul-powered skill move with every single character, it's also rather detailed at the same time and is just hella engaging. All of the characters' moves in both arcs are vastly different from one another, both when it comes to their execution and effects. Each and every character has a different weapon of choice and thus comes with different types of specialties. Farrell's the all-around hard hitter type of guy that will eventually be able to wield a god sword. Emma and her cute little low damage output gun functions as a healer to aid the team. Walter's a bitter hurt man that's just full of pure attack power and thus even learns an instant death move at some point. And Sophie's the badass anime waifu with a fucking machine gun that just lets the dog bark as hard as she can, while simultaneously being able to aid other members in their soul usage. And that's just the main 4 I used in the first arc, let alone the other characters you get to play around with. And to make things better, the game provides each and every character with an extensive set of divergent moves that don't just differ from one another, but also barely share any similarities within the individual characters' movesets as well. From a damage boost based on the enemy being bipedal or airborne, to inflicting poison or sleep, to lowering accuracy, defense or attack. There's just a huge amount of variety in the characters' movesets. Not only preventing the game from becoming stale and boring, but also adding layers of tactical depth to the combat, making you choose carefully what type of damage or effects will be most effective in any given situation. Aside from when Walter straight up eliminates them, no matter the health that is. That move is pretty fucking broken once it activates. And then the enemies are all borked up with dope ass gimmicks as well. Some of them are as fast as Sonic the Hedgehog and get to move far too often. Some are slow as hell but hit like a fucking truck. Some are hella fast for the sole reason of healing the entire squad way too quickly, and others are just dumping attacks on you while on a timer, which will result in an enormous amount of damage once they reach, i.e. their 4th turn. And then, as a little side note, I'm so fucking geeked about Soul being the move's energy source as well. As someone that's followed 6 years of Latin classes and ended it with a 4 out of 10 on the final exam, seeing Image Epoch use the Latin word for sun as the core of their game is just hella cool, what can I say? You're charging moves with your internal soul, your internal sun that powers your entire existence. That's pretty fucking cool to me, I don't care what anyone says. And powering your existence is just an unprecedented amount of fun. Charging your soul skill moves while managing your limited soul supply and leveling up your characters and their moves stays addicting from start to finish. Watching character stats grow as you level them up further and further and micromanaging equipment continuously is what always draws me into these JRPGs. And Soul Trigger pretty much captures entirely what makes this aspect of things so enjoyable to me. New weapons and armor are presented at pretty much a perfect pace, keeping the player broke as a bitch at all times, but never too broke to be unable to buy every piece of equipment you need before the next set of equipment is presented. You're just constantly chasing better stats while also achieving said better stats. And that is what I consider excellent game design. funnily enough, all of this is intentional as well, since these pieces of equipment are the pathway to unlocking new moves. Upon purchasing and equipping whatever piece of equipment with an additional move attached to it, the character will learn the move at random once this awake status activates in battle. The moves you unlock will gradually increase in power, but also slurp up much more soul, and even the upgraded versions of already existing moves, like this follow-up Strike 1, 2 and 3 series, are presented at a great pace that will never feel unbalanced in the slightest. They strategically lock these moves behind story events and gathering certain amounts of materials, resulting in only just obtaining the last set of moves in the last chapter of both respective arcs, rather than having everything you need beforehand and having nothing left to grind towards. It kept me excited for what was to come next, what the new moves would be like and what would change once I leveled them up. Being able to level the moves up by simply using them in combat is probably the most satisfying and addicting thing this game has to offer. It's such a simple yet effective mechanic. You just use a move, which in turn fills up the move's experience bar, with each level up providing new benefits. More attack damage, additional status effects, longer duration offset status effects, extending the move's hit range from one target to all targets, whether that concerns allies or enemies. The level ups feel rewarding and worth grinding towards, no matter the soul cost. And then I haven't even mentioned how they incentivize leveling the thing up all the way to its master skill, adding i.e. tons more damage and an added unique animation upon holding down the R button when using the move as well. And I mostly unlocked them for the extra animations. Adding unique, cool looking additional animations upon mastering a move is just as much of a great stylistic choice as the entire game is a great stylistic choice. I very much appreciate Image Epoch's visual approach to this game, pushing the PSP's hardware to its absolute limits. This game could have barely looked any better on the PSP. The over-the-top anime animations, the vibrant and lush flashy light effects and colors, the addition of necessary boob jiggles whenever they get the chance on anime waifu warriors with clothes that leave near to nothing for the imagination to appeal to horny guys like myself. The game's just a pleasure to look at. Though they justifyingly added the speed up button for those that cannot appreciate the work they put into these move animations and are fucking lamos at that, I found myself barely ever using it throughout the entire playthrough. Aside from this one falter attack maybe, that takes an eternity to finish. But even then, I more often than not just let the entire thing happen at normal speed. The move animations are just an absolute treat and made me realize how big of a part visuals can play in making me feel invested into a game. I dare say I'd get just as excited to figure out how a new move would look as what it would add to the combat. And that just added a whole new layer of enjoyment for me personally. My favorite move animations stem from the second arc, but revealing those will be far too spoilery, as the moves are performed by characters you may or may not have met before. Though this Lars animation isn't all too bad either. Picking favorites among these is nothing but nitpicking, however, as I pretty much love most of them equally as much. And the same really goes for everything outside of battle as well. Though wandering through these basic ass hallways isn't anything of visual excellence, the cutscenes and characters most certainly are. making the story feel much more intense and alive. The character models look great and rather detailed for its time and hardware. The women are these deliberately underdressed but simultaneously badass fucking characters, while the men range from Claffo-like weenies to Valter level coolness. There isn't a single character I'm not a fan of, honestly. Despite not moving their mouth, the characters are continuously expressing themselves via physical gestures and even lots of unique character portraits, giving them a shit ton of personality as well. Valter always having this surly but combative attitude, Fran always holding her arm and looking down because of her insecurity and conflict within herself about what's right and what's wrong. And then there's even the continuous movement of the camera rather than a static view, which makes even the dullest cutscenes feel more alive and overdramatic than they should ever be. I absolutely love it. To complete the picture, the enemies are pretty solid in terms of designs as well, ranging from passable to straight up sick as fuck. When it comes to the 20-ish bosses, the game throws at you. They all got this monstery hostile but simultaneously goofy ass look that works really well. All of them have unique attack and death animations, with some of them losing i.e. a tail or sharp claws upon falling below half HP, to give them an even wider range of unique attacks on top of the handful they already have access to prior to taking damage. The enemies switch up in every single dungeon, every area in said dungeon, and even when revisiting the same areas in the same dungeons in the second arc, making for about 150 unique enemies to encounter that switch up in numbers and species for every single encounter as well. And all of this just makes for a game that never even comes close to feeling stale or boring. But above all, feels incredibly balanced all throughout. This applies both to its storytelling and frequency of being stuck in cutscene hell, and its gameplay all the same. The plot never overstays its welcome in between the actual gameplay, and aside from the untranslated sections and a few meaningless subplots, it's a hell of a cool story as well. It's a story of hope and fighting for a better world, while experiencing lots of cruelty, pain and deaths of loved ones, all for the greater cause. Every time you think you've got things figured out, the game throws an unexpected plot twist at you that actually caught me off guard until the very last cutscene, leaving me with mixed feelings of happiness and sadness while the credits rolled. The first arc's ending is worth mentioning in particular, as it's the complete opposite of what you'd expect to happen at that very moment, which really left an impact on me in the bestest of ways possible. And for those that might have clicked on this video for a specific problem with the current translation patch, I got the answers for that as well. I hate having to spoil this, but at some point the game makes you choose between Sophie, Emma and ... If you pick Sophie, you're going to experience a certain malfunction in the game's code. After clearing the second to last dungeon in chapter 7 of the first arc, you'll watch a pre-rendered cutscene that's made in this anime style rather than in-game graphics. Upon entering the next in-game cutscene without being able to save in between, the game will crash every single time you sit through this. Now, while the translators are aware of this issue, them being silent for like 1.5 years doesn't bode well for an updated translation, including a fix to come out any day soon. So for now, all you got to do is save the game before this anime style cutscene in the English patch, grab the Japanese ISO that will recognize your save file from the English patch, sit through the cutscene in Japanese, save again, and voila! You're past the crash point, just like that. And that's really the only negative thing this game in its current state has to offer. Well, aside from the basic ass hallways you wander through in every single dungeon. However, wandering through these basic bitch hallways is almost entirely drowned out by the aforementioned balancedness. The game is one of the most balanced games I've personally ever got my hands on. For starters, while the gameplay is centered around wandering through hallways and fighting off tons of enemies in order to make your way to objectives, the encounter rate is incredibly generous and doesn't ever come close to pissing you off. Even though you can't flee from like half the fights until you get to use a certain character with a guaranteed fleeing move in the second arc, you've got plenty of time, soul, and resources to survive these enemies before reaching these conveniently placed teleport devices. Teleport devices that don't just function as a save point, but are also able to teleport you back to the base, restoring all of your health and soul upon arrival. Shit's just paced really well, and they never make the player feel like they're short on resources or about to game over due to lack of health and or soul. Running into and fighting enemies is the actual masterclass of balance, however, because I'm willing to boldly claim that this difficulty is actual perfection. Like 10 out of 10 good. Call me a filthy casual, but I have never, and will never be able to, enjoy a Souls-like game. To me, the whole game design of making you fail and replay the same part 37 fucking times is just a waste of time. That ain't fun to me. I just wanna see what the next part of the game has to offer rather than being stuck in the same area for 4 hours. And Image Epoch clearly feels the same way about this. Soul Trigger is never too hard, but never too easy, if that makes any sense. Throughout the entire game, you'll never be required to grind out levels or moves, but you're always challenged by whatever enemies you're facing. No matter the level or equipment, the machine church puppets you face will always do a shitload of damage and will make you sweat if you don't tactically think about what specific move to use and what enemy to target at any given time. The boss fights in particular can be ruthless as hell, with them hitting like a truck and even your most powerful master skill moves only chipping away at their health. Now, while you might think soul is a problem when i.e. Lars's move that consumes 100 soul only does a measly amount of damage, this soul extraction crystal functions as an anti-grind and anti-soul consumable spam mechanic, and thus eliminates the entire problem. Random enemies can drop these flare-light fragments worth 50, 100 or sometimes even 150 poots of soul that you can store in this crystal for later use. So whenever you're about to face a boss, which is very well indicated by i.e. a big ass door with a back to base crystal right in front of it, you can extract the soul to go as far over your soul limit as you'd like, meaning you'll be able to fight the boss with double or even triple the maximum amount of soul. And when the game makes you fight 3 bosses in a row in the second arc, each and every boss fight will drop a heavier flare-like crystal upon defeat, usually restoring about 60 to 70% of the amount you've spent on said boss fight. Shit's just hella convenient and a clever idea to prevent the classic tedious JRPG grind sessions. And all of this just makes for an incredibly fun game. You'll end up taking copious amounts of damage and even a death here and there, but never fatal enough to make you game over and reset. With only skipping a handful of random battles throughout the entire game due to poor soul management, I ended up unlocking and maxing out every single move of every single character pretty much perfectly at the very end of the final chapter in both respective arcs, thus making the game end right when there is nothing left to work towards. Soul Trigger did not get the treatment it deserved back in 2012. Not only did the game sell like trash, but was also labeled as kusoge, aka a shitty game, by the Japanese, receiving no more than 30 to 50 out of 100 points in most game reviews. That reception is probably what made Image Epoch refrain from any sorts of localization, and that's just hella depressing, considering how good of a game this really is. After playing this game for as long as I did, I will not tolerate any Soul Trigger slander anymore. Soul Trigger is far from kusoge. In fact, it's easily amongst my favorite games I've played in my lifetime. Whether that says something about this game or my gaming experiences really doesn't matter all that much to me. The game's got a solid but not super deep story with lots of cool and unexpected plot twists, crazy good looking visuals for the PSP era, and incredibly addicting, challenging, and most importantly, balanced as fuck gameplay that I'll happily plow through again if I ever have the time and or reason to. After playing this game, I just can't help but dream about how cool of a remake this game could have been. Just imagine this game with similar graphics to i.e. Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus, with them potentially making some slight alterations to the story and adding some new moves, equipment and items to expand on an already impressive list of shit to utilize. I'd absolutely love to see that. But the chances of that happening are zero, since the company responsible for this excellent game is dead and buried. And that just makes me sad, since these graphics and these animations are deserving of an HD upgrade. And nah, we all know I just want to see the boob jiggles in 4K HD.
これで少しは楽できるかしら。
What the hell is wrong with me?